In the early hours of the morning, a deafening roar shattered the uneasy calm over Russia's Rostov region. The source was not an accident, not a train derailment, but calculated and precise Ukrainian military strike aimed at one of the most critical logistics arteries feeding Russia's war machine. The target, a massive railway junction in Rostov, a hub that for decades had served as a vital lifeline between Russia's industrial heartland and its military operations in occupied Ukrainian territories. For months, Ukrainian intelligence had been tracking the movement of fuel tankers, heavy equipment, and ammunition trains through this choke point. Rostov's railway network was more than steel and sleepers. It was a bloodstream of Russia's southern military logistics. Any disruption here could ripple far beyond the Donbass front lines, slowing the delivery of reinforcements, starving units of supplies, and forcing Moscow to reroute through slower, less efficient corridors. The operation that unfolded was not impulsive. It was a product of painstaking reconnaissance, satellite imagery analysis, intercepted communications, and the growing precision of Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities. As dawn approached, Ukrainian forces launched a coordinated attack, striking with devastating accuracy. Multiple explosions ripped through the junction, sending plumes of black smoke high into the sky. Witnesses described seeing wagons loaded with fuel erupt into fireballs, while key switching stations were reduced to twisted steel and scorched earth. Within hours, videos began circulating online, showing the inferno consuming entire sections of track. Russian emergency services rushed the scene, but the destruction was so extensive that even Moscow's tightly controlled state media could not completely suppress the scale of the damage. For the Kremlin, this was more than an infrastructure hit. It was a direct blow to the image of control and invulnerability it tries to project. Behind the fiery images that spread across social media lay months of meticulous preparation. Ukrainian military planners understood that striking a railway junction of such strategic value would require more than raw firepower. It demanded flawless timing, accurate intelligence, and the element of surprise. Reconnaissance drones flew deep over Russian territory under strict radio silence, capturing high-resolution imagery of the junction's daily operations. Analysts in Kiev mapped every siding, storage track, and switching system, identifying exactly where to hit for maximum disruption. They knew the junction didn't just handle cargo. It was a convergence point for troop trains, armored vehicles, and critical fuel shipments bound for front. Interception teams, working in tandem with Ukraine's cyber and signals intelligence units, monitored radio chatter and train scheduling systems. They waited for the moment when the hub would be most congested, when fuel cars, ammunition wagons, and heavy equipment will be parked close together, creating conditions for a chain reaction explosion. Finally, in the days before the strike, Ukrainian artillery and missile units were placed on standby, their coordinates locked, their targets programmed. The moment came in the dead of night, when the Russian side least expected an attack. Precision munitions were launched, slamming into the junction with surgical accuracy. The explosions were not random. Each one was aimed at a point that would cripple operations for weeks, if not months. For Ukraine, this wasn't simply about destroying physical infrastructure. It was a statement. Russian supply lines, no matter how deep inside their territory, are vulnerable. And for the soldiers on the front lines who face constant artillery barrages, the news was a morale boost, proof that the enemy's lifeline could be severed. The moment reports of the blast reached Moscow, the Kremlin's inner circle went into crisis mode. For years, they had operated under the assumption that deep Russian territory was secure from Ukrainian strikes. This illusion was shattered overnight. The Rostov junction wasn't just another rail point. It was one of the key arteries keeping the southern front alive. Russian state media initially tried to downplay the incident, releasing vague statements about a localized fire caused by a technical malfunction. But as videos of the towering fireball and secondary explosions began flooding telegram channels, the truth could no longer be contained. Civilian witnesses described a deafening series of blasts, shrapnel tearing through buildings and the sky glowing red for miles. Military logistics officers scrambled to reroute trains, but the geography of southern Russia meant detours would add days to delivery times. Fuel shipments had to be diverted hundreds of kilometers, creating bottlenecks across the supply network. Ammunition that should have reached frontline units in 48 hours now risked being delayed for over a week, a lifetime in the rhythm of war. Inside the Kremlin, the political fallout was just as serious. Advisors warned President Putin that Ukraine's ability to hit so far behind the lines would embolden Kiev's allies to supply even more advanced weaponry. Intelligence briefings painted a grim picture. This was not an isolated strike, but part of a broader campaign targeting critical nodes in Russia's military infrastructure. The attack also triggered a rare public backlash in Rostov. Locals, already weary from the economic strain of war, expressed anger that such vital infrastructure had been left so poorly defended. Social media posts, quickly deleted by censors, questioned how Ukrainian forces could operate with such precision inside Russia's borders. For Ukraine, the strike achieved its dual aim, physically disrupting Russia's war machine and psychologically undermining the Kremlin's aura of control. And in Moscow, the realization began to sink in. The battlefield was no longer confined to Ukraine. On paper, railways are just infrastructure. In war, they are tempo. Break the rails, and you don't merely delay deliveries. You slow time for the enemy. And in the south, time is ammunition, fuel, rotation, and morale. The Rostov hub existed for a single strategic reason: to compress distance. It transformed the sprawl of factories, depots, and refineries across Russia's interior into predictable, scheduled flows toward the front. Every day, trains stitched together a moving pipeline, diesel from one direction, artillery shells from another, replacement engines and transmissions for armored vehicles from a third, all converging, sorting, and fanning out again. The junction was the metronome. When the blast tore through the yard, that rhythm collapsed. Switching houses burned, points jammed, signaling failed. What survived had to be operated manually, slow, error-prone, and dangerous under heat and smoke. For rail crews trained to work by the clock stopped. Immediate battlefield effects followed. Artillery cadence dipped. Batteries that had been firing on a steady resupply cycle began stretching their fire missions. Fewer guided shells appeared along priority sectors. Harassment fire replaced saturation fire. Commanders started rationing exotics, precision munitions, and rocket packages to save them for counter-battery emergencies. Fuel chains kinked. Armor brigades that live and die by diesel were told to reduce non-essential movement. Recovery vehicles sat idle longer. Platoon-level raids that depend on quick armored inserts were scrubbed or scaled down. Even drone recovery teams felt the squeeze as generators ran harder to keep launch crews on tempo. Medical evacuation and rotation lagged. Trains that normally moved wounded and rotating personnel back and forth had to share scarce tracks with priority cargo. The human system slowed, and with the ability to keep frontline units psychologically fresh. None of this happened in isolation. Ukraine's general staff designed the strike as a nodal kill, not to chase every train, but to break a hub and force Moscow into its worst logistics habit: road substitution. The numbers are unforgiving. A single freight train can carry the equivalent of 200 to 300 truckloads. Shifting even a portion of Rostov's throughput onto highways does more than create traffic. It creates targets. Within 48 hours, reconnaissance units reported long, uneven convoys detouring through secondary routes and rural roads. These lines move slower, burn more fuel, require more escorts, and are susceptible to the kind of attrition Ukraine has perfected. Long-range loitering munitions against lead and trail vehicles, FPV strikes on bridge approaches, and timed ambushes at choke points. A convoy halted for 30 minutes becomes a gridlock for hours. Gridlock becomes scarcity. Scarcity becomes tactical opportunity. Operationally, 3 shifts emerged. Frontline discretion shrank. Russian sector commanders, accustomed to requesting emergency stocks for short, sharp offensives, found the cupboard thin. Instead of push now, the guidance drifted toward hold and probe. That change in verbs matters. Probes consume less, concede initiative, and open seams for Ukrainian local counterattacks. Strategic rerouting exposed depth. Detours funneled through alternate hubs not built for wartime volume. Yard capacity, siding length, and crane availability became limiting factors, the kind you cannot fix with orders. Each patched route concentrated risk and telegraph patterns, letting Ukrainian planners pre-compute the next vulnerable node in the chain. Air defense dilution, Protecting more convoys over longer distances forced Russia to peel short-range air defenses from fixed sites. The very systems that might have guarded the replacement rail junctions were now leapfrogging along highways. New gaps appeared, gaps that deep strike planners notice. Meanwhile, inside Rostov, repair brigades face a paradox. The parts they needed to fix the junction had to come through the junction. Replacement switches, interlock racks, high-tension cabling, signal relays, all heavy, specialized, and scarce. Under normal conditions, railways cannibalize non-critical spurs to get a hub back online. In wartime, every spur is critical. The result is a patchwork recovery that restores form before function. Tracks visible, capacity hollow. Ukraine exploited that window with a follow-on rhythm. Not constant bombardment, which wastes munitions and invites hardened defenses, but timed, intelligence-led punctures. Hit during peak congestion. Stand off while fires burn. Strike again at the first sign of synchronized movement. This is not destruction for its own sake. It's tempo denial, a strategy that wins by forcing the adversary to live permanently in yesterday's plan. And the psychological vector? For the Kremlin, Rostov has symbolic mass. It is a gateway to the south, a command city, a place whose name appears on maps and in military briefings. Seeing that name attached to images of smoke columns and flaming tankers cuts differently than a nameless depot. Railway workers talk. Videos leak. Families ask questions that censorship cannot answer without admitting vulnerability. Perception turns logistics from a technical problem into a political one. On the Ukrainian side, the strike lands as proof that deep fire's doctrine scales. Not every success requires a missile with a famous acronym. Precision comes from the kill chain. Satellites incision to spot, small teams to confirm, planners to time congestion, and the right mix of standoff systems to deliver. When the chain is tight, the means can vary. The effect is the same. A railway heartbeat stutters, and an entire front starts breathing shallow. This is why one junction matters. It is not just rails on ground. It is the invisible math of a campaign. How many shells per day? How many liters per kilometer? How many rotations before a brigade loses edge? Break the node, and the math breaks, too. And when the math breaks, momentum shifts, first by inches, then by sectors.